All right, it's been 32 years and 7 election cycles since American voters last saw this.
Whose fault is that? Not the Democrats, not the Republicans. Somewhere out there, there's an extraterrestrial that's doing this to us, I guess.
Speaking of aliens, 3 candidates have not appeared on a presidential debate stage together since Ross Perot joined Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush in 1992. It seems unlikely to happen this year, even though independent presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr. claims he will meet the qualifications to participate in the 2 recently coordinated debates between President Biden and former President Trump. Instead, we're likely to get more of this.
Make sure you, in fact, let people know you're a senator. I'm not going to answer the question because the question is radical left. Will you shut up, man?
All right, joining me now is Michael Smerconish. He is the host of CNN Smerconish and also a CNN political commentator. Michael, happy Friday. Wonderful to see you. RFK Jr. not happy about these debate requirements. This is what he says. President Biden and Trump are colluding to lock America into a head-to-head matchup that 70% say that they do not want. What is your take on this? Should he be allowed on the stage?
If he meets the criteria, I think that he should be. I think that the only thing that former President Trump and President Biden agree on is that neither wants RFK Jr. to be on that stage.
Well,
Kasie,
Trump said yesterday that he'd be fine with it, actually. But I take your point on Biden.
Yeah, I think that the data is mixed, right? I mean, in Philadelphia a month ago, 15 Kennedy family members came to town to stand on the stage with President Biden. Either 5 or 6 of them were siblings of RFK Jr. That's how vehement they are in opposition to RFK Jr. And then within 2 days, an NBC survey came out which defied conventional wisdom that if Bobby's on that stage, he's going to pull from Joe Biden. All of a sudden, here was a poll that said, wait a minute, he actually pulls from Donald Trump. I think it's determined on a state-by-state basis. But Biden and Trump both view him as a wild card that neither wants to deal with. Can I also say that I think Donald Trump was outmaneuvered by President Biden in the last 2 days on this whole issue. There are going to be 2 debates, not 3. There won't be an audience. Trump feeds on an audience, even when it's an audience in opposition to Trump and the removal of RFK Jr.
No, it's a really interesting point. I mean, do you think that Biden's push on this, his insistence on doing these debates and the way it came together, does that signal that the campaign recognized he was behind and basically had to do something to shake it up?
Totally. I think that the Times, Siena, Philadelphia Inquirer poll, there's so damn many polls, but I think that that poll, which came out earlier this week, hit like a thunderclap, which showed that in the battleground states, it continues to be Donald Trump's lead. The national polls, you know, I'm mesmerized by them like everybody else, but it's those 6 or 7, if you include North Carolina, battleground states that matter. And I think that was a wake-up call for them, and they said, let's get to it sooner than later.
There was some reporting this week on the polling question that President Biden himself simply doesn't believe the polls, and that that's a part of the explanation for his and the campaign's kind of stay the course strategy. The debates may argue, them deciding to do these debates this way may argue against that, but there is kind of the flashback to the primary in 2020 when he seemed really down. He'd been written off by a lot of people, and he still came back and won. That lesson seems to still be there for them. How do you see that, and is it the right way to look at it?
So there's time on the clock, Kasie, but there's not as much time on the clock as there used to be. Like, we've got to disabuse ourselves of the idea that there's 6 months left in this election because people vote in September. You know, it's really going to be game on. Here we are now. Memorial Day weekend is coming. A lot of folks are going to tune out for the summer. And when we regroup as a society, it's Labor Day weekend. It's not really the start of the 11th hour of the campaign. It means people are actually casting their ballots by mail. So I have to believe that also was a factor in the Biden decision to try and snooker, frankly, Donald Trump into agreeing to 2 debates and not 3 with no audience.
Pretty remarkable. So, Michael, I know you also have been following, and I can't believe we're still talking about this after this was a while ago now, but this roast of Tom Brady has had some serious legs, and he says he regrets it. Watch.
I loved when the jokes were about me. I thought they were so fun. I didn't like the way that it affected my kids. I wouldn't do that again because of the way that affected actually the people that I care about the most.
Should he not have done this?
I thought it was hilarious. I mean, I have a very sophomore. You did? Okay, thank God. I have a very sophomoric sense of humor. I can't decide if Caddyshack or Animal House or Slapshot were the best movie of all time. I had Sally Jenkins from the Washington Post on my program last weekend, and she's got a great sense of humor, you know, comes from Dan Jenkins. And she said, Michael, I wanted to laugh, but I just thought it was crude. I think Brady's mistake was that he should have recognized if Giselle is on limits, then so too are the kids. And by extension, she probably should have been off limits. But that would have been 50% of the material in that special.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think some of it was a little over the top. I can understand why there was this kind of fallout. I think he made a lot of money off of it, so who knows? Michael Smerconish, thank you very much for being with us. I always appreciate having you. And don't miss Michael's show tomorrow morning on CNN. Thank you. See you soon.